As a journalist, conducting an investigation can be one of the biggest thrills. It can also be one of the most frustrating things you'll ever do. While the issues covered are really important, some can be very dry, with the raw data just full of facts and figures. While you're working on it, you might ask yourself, is this actually going to be interesting? Is it going to get people to take action? Hi, I'm Khalil Majid, Managing Editor at Faqcheck Lab, a Malaysian fact-checking and media literacy organization building misinformation resilience and combating online falsehoods. And I'll be helping you to tell a story well in an investigation, so that your projects make the most impact. I've worked most of my professional life in the background as an investigative producer, conducting research, getting insight, and planning out stories. And the question of, is this actually going to be interesting, is one that I've often wondered working on every news story. But I've also learned some important lessons along the way. But before we get into that, what is an investigative news story? Normal news reports focus on who, what, where, when, and why. If you've answered these questions, your story is usually good to go. Investigative journalism applies storytelling devices used in fiction to tell a non-fiction story, but we do it in a responsible way, without making things up. Crafting a narrative like a storyteller allows you to take your audience on a journey, to go deeper into an issue in a compelling way, and to evoke an emotion. And to do that, you need to storytell. The who in your story is not just a name with a title, but a character with a personality. The what isn't just an event, but something with a cause and a consequence. Where isn't just an address, but a setting. When is not just what's happening now, but the timeline of a narrative. And why often weaves into how, as you uncover methods and motivations that people want to hide. People love stories that give added value that they can't find elsewhere, and about matters that affect them or their communities. Investigative journalism is a service that allows people to make better decisions about issues affecting their lives. Now we've got the basics down, why don't we dive into our first investigative story together? There are many ways to spot a potential story to investigate, but here are 3 easy entry points with big paybacks. 1. Monitor the media. It could be the usual news networks or social media. Focus on issues you're interested in so that you can easily spot patterns and know right away when something just doesn't feel right. And be curious about what is changing. Ask yourself, how did it happen? Why did certain groups of people or animals stop turning up at a certain place, for example? What are the interest groups saying about it? As you monitor the media, look out for the people in the background who might have access to useful information. For example, don't just accept the official line from the top spokesperson or the CEO. What does the cleaner or the driver possibly have to say? The second entry point, revisit major events of the past. Go back to them a year later, 3 years later, 10 years later. What has happened since? Did new events unfold? Has any new information surfaced? This is a low-hanging fruit that reaps fantastic rewards. A story that gives you not only access, but continuously provides you with new stories stemming from the original issue. And the third entry point is you and your passions. What are you passionate about? Investigations are hard work with long hours. Sometimes it's risky. You need to work on something that gets you out of bed and gives you purpose. When something is important to us, we're more sensitive about what's going wrong when no one else is taking it seriously. Put it this way, if the issue doesn't fascinate you or make you angry and upset, don't work on it. There is no shame in that. But when you do, put aside personal feelings and be professional about it. Now that you've decided on a topic, you need a hypothesis for the investigation. A hypothesis is basically a one-liner that tells people what the issue is and what you're trying to prove. It may or may not be true. That's what you're investigating. The hypothesis helps you stay focused, because you'll soon find yourself buried under a ton of information and everything will feel important and relevant. So let's craft a hypothesis. Let's look at this investigation from 2018. China not only controls its citizens at home, but also those abroad. It's increasing evidence anyone who displeases Chinese authorities will be targeted. The hypothesis lends itself to a whole host of questions to prove. So here's a little activity. Pause the video and think about 5 questions that instantly hit you having read the hypothesis. There's no one right answer here, but if you work with the elements from earlier, this is a breeze. And you'll realize quickly that once you get your initial questions down, more pop up. and then more. Soon you'll be asking questions about your questions. And don't worry if your questions seem simple. They're the best ones, because they help inform your more difficult ones later on. But whatever they are, you'll see your questions answered in the documentary China's Spies, Lies and Blackmail on Al Jazeera English. And the answers are findings that prove the hypothesis. The narrative is structured in a way that takes viewers on a journey that investigates harassment. What you get is a compelling and easy to understand investigative story. One thing to remember, if you prove your hypothesis, great. If the evidence shows otherwise, don't twist the facts to fit your hypothesis. Your hypothesis should be malleable, and you should be comfortable ditching it if the facts don't support it. Now that we've got the facts, let's structure our story. Avoid making your audience work to understand your findings. Don't just dump it on them. You're not here to show off how much you know. Rather, you're here to guide them along a journey of discovery. So assume they know nothing about the topic when you present it, and storytell. Weave your tale, bring in your hero, and take them on a journey to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The best narratives immerse viewers, so should you. One of the most effective storytelling tools is to identify your strongest character with a human interest story that's a snapshot of the wider problem. Make people care for them and empathize with their struggles. You can then use them as a doorway to dive deeper into issues, wrongdoings, or loopholes that cause their problems. As you build your character's narrative, consider the most effective way to lay it out, either through a timeline or through touch points. A timeline is chronological. Each event clearly affects the next. But in order to use it effectively, you'll need strong access to a good main character, which isn't the easiest thing to do. If that's not possible, a touch point is a really good alternative. With touch points, you can have multiple characters with no real connections to one another. This works because each character has a common narrative, which allows you to move from one person to the next in a coherent manner. For example, they live in the same village or go to the same school, or they are victims of the same incident, but affected in different ways. At this point, you'll have hopefully made some sense of all the facts and figures, laid out all your interviews, and found your story's protagonists and antagonists. Through this whole process, you'll have become a subject matter expert in your own right. I hope I've given you a sense of how to tell an investigative story and make it compelling. You don't always have to go for a blockbuster investigation. Similar skills, thought processes, and mindsets are needed whether the story is big or small. Start somewhere. Build your experience from smaller projects. Now that there's nothing stopping you, go and tell your story.